Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Everybody enjoyed the conference yesterday. Had some great sessions. Everybody's got to enjoy downtown Nashville. We'll get to the good stuff. We got some great speakers that took time out of their schedule to come down and help educate us on energy efficiency and energy conservation. We have with Clean Edison, we have Benjamin Ashmore, who is a senior vice president of government business development. He has over 15 years of experience in affordable housing, and he has worked with HUD on energy policy. We also have Herta Niels, who is an architect. He is lead AP, and he has trained more lead students than anyone else in the Northeast. He's also taught in over 20 cities. We also have Megan McLenroy. She was a former staffer for Harry Reid, and she works with Clean Edison on the policy and economic development. I hope I got all that right because they sent me a nice bio and intro, and I forgot to print it off. So if I mess that up, I apologize. So thank you all for attending, and take it away, Ben.
Thanks, Jared. Y'all are a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed bunch. One wouldn't know this is the last day of the conference. Like Jared said, I hope we've had a chance to get around Nashville and see some of the sights. We're going to be talking to you today about a global presentation about home energy efficiency, particularly in the multifamily industry. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that I'm sure you're well aware of about implementing energy efficiency programs at your developments. We'll go over some of the recent studies that have come out that are very helpful and help push this industry towards efficiency. We'll go over some of the national and local standards. HUD has a number of requirements, but what you'll find out is a lot of localities are starting to put in play their own requirements. Most importantly, what we'll be presenting to you, and that's who the team that's been assembled, we'll be talking about some of the solutions that are out there that help you in your developments become more efficient. Most importantly, everyone talks about efficiency in the terms of cost, and that is a very important thing. But we can't forget that this is also about resident health and safety. So we'll go over how important that is. And then probably the question you want to hear the most, we'll talk about how you fund some of this. We recognize that in this space, funding is a critical issue. And as much as we would all love to be able to do the comprehensive energy retrofits from top to bottom, the reality is we don't quite have the funding to do that. So we'll talk about that at the end. Just to give you an overview, talk about energy efficiency. It has changed, and part of that is a reality of changing market prices. The old paradigm of our grandparents who thought that a leaky home or a leaky apartment was great. You need to have fresh air in the draft. We now know that that is the worst possible thing for energy efficiency. All of your costs are going out the window when you have a drafty home. A second thing that we know is the costs in energy have changed. For example, in a present home today, apartment and, it's an average of apartments and residential homes, 45% of your energy costs are due to heating your space. As your space is air, if you're losing it, you're losing those costs. Just to give you an idea of how energy prices have changed, just 5 years ago, according to the Department of Energy, heating space was only 31% of your building. Water heating was only 12%, and computers were just 1%. So that makeup of where your energy costs are being driven as different components rise in prices, whether it's heating oil or natural gas or electricity, those numbers change. Just by the numbers. There are 132 million homes in America, according to the last census data. 26% of them are in multifamily structures, more than 2 units in a building. Over a third are 45 years old. Over a third are between 25 and 45 years old. And here's why that matters. It was not until the 1980s that energy codes were actually put in place in state and local areas. Now, that's nationwide. If you pull out the HUD inventory and you compare just the HUD inventory, 85% of the HUD inventory nationwide was built prior to the introduction of energy codes and building codes. And as that energy is consumed, homes account for 1/5 of all of the carbon emissions in the United States. So let's talk about where those losses are. You saw a pie chart before that talked about what percentages of a person's heating bill goes to the different areas. This is where the inefficiency is. 29% of the lost energy in a home comes from heating. It makes sense. It's the space. Cooling, water heating. These are the areas where, if you were to go in and audit the average apartment or single-family home, this is where you're losing your money. It has real consequences. The average family bill as of 2009 was $2,200. Now, in our space, we recognize that some of that is paid through utility allowances. Sometimes that's borne by the resident, but that's the average number. The Department of Energy has determined, through a number of studies, that the average wasted energy is between 20 and 40% in every home. If you just take the center of that, 30%, that's $87 billion a year that's being washed down the drain from lost energy. Obviously, we're talking about dollars, but there is the environmental impact. And I know many of us here consider that when we look at these cost measures. Let's talk about how much that is. It's 1.4 billion tons of greenhouse gases. If you wanted to make up that greenhouse emissions, you'd have to grow 32 billion tree seedlings for 10 years. And just considering the populations and considering that this is region 4 and 5, those states are the states that you would have to cover in forest over the course of 1 year just to take care of the energy emissions that are lost by homes in the United States. There's real costs here. One last metric to look at it. 75,000 homes is a pretty small American city. The amount of energy wasted in 75,000 homes on an annual basis is equivalent to the energy that was spilled in the Gulf with the Gulf oil spill. Those are real costs, and those costs translate to the health and safety of tenants. We'll get to that in a few minutes when we come back to the health and savings. With respect to the cost, HUD spends an estimated $6 billion a year on utilities, and that's over 15% of the HUD budget. In this era of preserving affordable housing, as everyone is constrained for costs, there's been discussion and proposals to deal with taking money out of replacement reserves to deal with funding shortfalls come the end of the year. Just imagine if we can take in the projects just 10% of that $6 billion, how you could use that in your communities to preserve and enhance affordable housing. About $1.5 billion is through public housing operating subsidies. The rest is through the utility allowances in the Housing Choice Voucher Program and the Section 8 programs. I think it's well known, but I'll just go over it. The energy costs are borne by those with less means. If you look at the population and you compare the percentage of income that is spent on utilities, for the U.S. median, it's only 4%. If you go to the SSI elderly, which many of those are in the 202 projects, it's 19% of their income. If you look at those who are on AFDC, receiving food stamps, 26% of their income is going to their utility bills. Energy costs for your residents are often their second largest shelter expense. It's second only to the mortgage payment or the rent. It can be a factor in mortgage defaults on your properties. It leads to multifamily building abandonment, and as is an obvious conclusion, low and moderate income families are those that are at most risk to rising energy costs. Now, the affordable housing space is focused on energy, and that's why you're here today. But energy efficiency has been addressed in the corporate sector for a long time to some real substantial gains. New refrigerators use 1/3 less energy than those that were built in 1972. Commercial lighting systems, half the energy of the 80s. Next door, I don't know if any of you noticed all of the colleagues in, well, not colleagues, they're the individuals in the blue shirts. It says MAP. It's not multifamily accelerated processing lenders. I happened to speak to somebody on the elevator. They are here from Carrier. Carrier is a manufacturer of HVAC systems. We happen at Clean Edison to be the preferred provider for training services for Carrier. They have been on board with us for a number of years where we train their staff. So the private sector has really captured and realized these efficiency gains. You can see 25% of industrial energy use is down in the United States, and naturally, while consumption has increased as we have become greener, greenhouse emissions have declined. I'm sure I don't have to ask, I'm probably going to get the same answer, but I'll get it. What do you think is the biggest challenge that you all have to implementing energy efficiency measures in your developments? Anyone? Money. Absolutely. You mean you didn't grow the money tree? Unfortunately, money is a big problem, and costs are a huge hurdle. But the second one that most people don't think about is uncertainty. Psychologists tell us that we are motivated in everything we do by three things: fear, anxiety, and greed. I don't like the word greed, especially in this room, because it's more a cost reality, as you pointed out. But one of the biggest problems that you have when it comes to energy efficiency is the cost and not knowing what's going to happen. It's a complicated graph. We'll get to it in a few minutes, but essentially, this is a graph of a study where energy efficiency retrofits were done. The bottom number is the projected savings. The left number is the actual savings. If every project performed after a retrofit exactly as they were intended, all of those points would go on that 45-degree angle. As you can see, most of them are underneath the angle. So your uncertainty when you're back at your developments and you're looking at what you can do, it's twofold. It's, I don't know what I need to do. I don't want to have to spend a lot of money when I don't know what I need to know just to get something back that's going to be not feasible. For example, windows. It's well known within the industry that windows have a very long payback. If you're looking at your development and you're trying to decide what should we do, you don't want to spend $10,000 on an energy audit that's only going to come back and say everything's great but windows. Replace all your windows. And that's something that, unless you have it in a mile plan or it's in your P&A, that's something that you would have a very difficult time lending to. The other uncertainty is, if I spend this money, if I take these capital reserves from other areas, am I going to achieve the gains that I predict that I'll get? So let's talk about before we get into the studies, let's talk about the path of an energy retrofit. When you go back to your developments and you're thinking about doing energy savings, one of the first things you need to look at is engaging your tenants and designing how much you have the ability to spend. Most people think of an energy retrofit as, I'm going to call the contractor, they're going to come in, they're going to tell me what I need to do, I'll do it, and everything's going to work great, my bills are going to go down. In reality, it is a very complicated path. It starts with engaging your tenants. It starts with creating jobs in your community, which is a very important thing. It entails educating your tenants, educating your facility staff, and educating your building management staff. Everybody works together. Naturally, it involves improving your physical plant. It also promotes the stabilization in your neighborhood when you enhance your affordable housing. Of course, you reduce your operating expenses, which is very important. If you are a building that is under owner management, your owners are saving money. If you're a public housing authority, you're saving money. Your tenants are saving money if you're in a individually metered building. And at the very end, the benefit to the environment is you have reduced your greenhouse gases. Now, as the industry has matured, this is not just me telling you this, there are some studies that have looked very comprehensively at your world and come back with some key findings. Deutsche Bank Living Cities did a study of 231 projects that had gone through a comprehensive energy retrofit. The report was just published in 2012. It is available on the internet. It's also on our website. But this is what their 4 key findings were. That retrofits, when they're done, they ensure the long-term viability of affordable housing. Point number 1, very important. They create jobs and they have economic impacts. I'll talk about Section 3 requirements in a minute for those of you that are public housing authorities, but that's also a critical consideration when you're looking at job creation. Your residents benefit from lower costs and enhanced health, safety, and comfort. And again, there's an environmental component to this. You're reducing greenhouse gas emissions and you're helping the environment. This is what they found from studying those 231 projects. For every $1 million invested, it created 10 jobs. $40 billion is invested annually in residential buildings nationwide. On average, in these 231 developments, it resulted in $300 per unit per year savings to tenants. And as to you, as the building operators, it resulted in 19% fuel savings and 7% electrical savings. Another study, this one is out of Oregon, so I recognize it's a bit out of your purview, but when they looked at it, and I'm not going to go through all these details, you can check out the slide decks once they're posted by HUD and they're on our website. But here's an important thing. They found that per $1 million spent on energy audits and retrofits, it created 14.4 jobs, and the household energy savings in Oregon were $1.3 million. Booz Allen Hamilton did a similar study. They came in a little bit lower, 11.6 jobs created. They also found that there was a direct contribution to GDP from the saved energy and the increased use of those funds. Vermont did a very interesting study. So one of the things that you're going to look at, and this is not the exact path that you would use if you were to go through an energy retrofit. But one of the things that Vermont looked at is they had grant monies and they ran a national pilot program where the Fuel Efficiency Partnership and the Housing and Conservation Board received a large grant award to do energy retrofits. And when they started into the program, they thought it would be very easy to just hand out checks. Who's going to turn down the money? And once they got into the program, they found that they had a lot of challenges they did not anticipate. Some of these challenges were the staff was inexperienced on site. When they went in, when the staff would be interested in beginning to the program, there was a huge hurdle in education just to get the staff to realize that maybe they would be a candidate for the grant monies. They had great difficulty in benchmarking. They wanted the sites to provide the data. But as is probably obvious, many sites don't have the experience to even know how to begin benchmarking, what data to get, how to interact with the utilities, what information must be obtained, how long do you have to go back in your utility data to get good benchmarking. The staff had difficulty in selecting vendors. The energy space is a little bit different than other areas. One would think that a housing authority would be very easy to do a RFP and select vendors. But they found in Vermont that they had to handhold a lot of the housing entities because they just had a great difficult time doing the vendors. They hadn't considered tenant behavior issues, both before and after. And then, most importantly, after the work was done, and they went back to see a year later how the projects were performing, they found that in many cases, the building staff were operating it incorrectly. Now, some of these complicated energy systems have a lot of small check marks. Some things are as simple as checking a filter on a monthly basis, changing it, and adjusting a few settings. If you do that on a regular basis, you'll save energy. If you don't, and you operate it like the old boiler system, then you actually have a more inefficient system than you had before you did the energy retrofit. And as this was a project that was going forward, they found that lenders were very apprehensive about adding funds into the projects because there were so many of these difficulties. The end result was where they initially anticipated at the beginning that the retrofits should be about a 6-month process where Vermont was involved, it turned into an 18-month process because they didn't have the ability to come in and just give the grant money and go out and go to the next project because they had to do so much project experience, bringing the staff and the tenants on board and up to speed. If you think about your developments and you think about doing a comprehensive energy audit, there are a lot of related things. The sum of these studies, and in particular the Deutsche Bank study, came back with 12 key findings. Now, if you look at the bubbles, and we'll go to them in a second, you can see that really only one of those is an energy auditor. The rest are staff, tenants, contractors, your owner, your equipment, and weather. If you look at those bubbles, you can control every single one of them but the weather, and that's an important consideration. The 12 key findings that they had were that there was an inadequate scope. When the auditor came in and the auditor examined the building characteristics, the building staff did not provide the auditor with the requisite information for the auditor to know all that was going on so they could come up with a good audit. Also, inherent in that is an audit over projection. If the audit doesn't have the right information, then the audit could be an over projection. Building management capacity was a huge problem, and Vermont found the same thing. The managers did not have the capacity to understand the energy and to manage the process. Improper execution of the retrofit scope, those are your contractors. When your energy auditor comes in and does your initial report, and then you move to doing the retrofit, you have to manage the process and make sure that your contractors are building out the scope and are handling the process as was intended. They found that there was poor implementation. This is after the contractor leaves, when you're implementing your retrofit policies and procedures. Incomplete. They only did part of it. Unexpected operations and maintenance. The energy auditor and the manufacturer of the equipment expects that you're going to run it in an operating and maintaining capacity to their standards. What Deutsche Bank and Living Cities found is that often did not happen. Lack of training, specifically with respect to the controls on the systems. And that would be your facilities manager, your building superintendent, your director of operations. You all have different titles, but your senior staff who are responsible for managing the project, those are the people that had inadequate training. Tenant behavior is a big thing. I know it's a misnomer in this industry that tenants are going to behave the way they behave and there's nothing you can do as managers. But in reality, with a little bit of training and a little bit of buy-in from your tenants, even in cases where their utilities are paid through an allowance, you can modify their behavior and help them move towards more sustainable living practices. Lack of ongoing maintenance was a big problem. Inadequate understanding of lighting systems and human behavior, which that again ties into tenant behavior, facilities behavior. And unexpected tenant behavior after the retrofit. Now, I just mentioned 12 key points. Only one of those points had to do with the energy auditor. One of the results of these studies that have come out is that where 3 and 4 years ago, many people blamed the auditor for discrepancy in actual savings with predicted savings. So in cases where an auditor came in and said, if you do X, Y, and Z, you will save a certain amount of money. When the project went through the retrofit and they did not achieve it, many building owners and managers were quick to blame the energy auditor. We had a bad energy audit. What the industry and what the studies have shown is that it's not the energy auditor, it is the driver of the system. I like being in the South because I can talk NASCAR. When I'm in the Northeast, I've got to kind of change this and switch it up to talk Lamborghinis or something that's not applicable. But if you can think in NASCAR terms, if you were to field a team, you need your car, you need your engine, your pit crew, your crew chief, all of those things. But you're not going to be successful if you hire a bus driver to drive your NASCAR car. So think of your staff as being the driver of your energy system. You have to ensure that the person who's on site, who's responsible both before the retrofit and after the retrofit, or even in cases where you're not doing a retrofit, but you're just implementing an energy savings plan, the most important person is the driver, just like on a racing team. You have a strategy. That's what your energy audit is. It's not going to implement itself. If you don't have someone to execute, you're going to lose all of the gains from the energy audit. In your world, there are a lot of challenges. There's not a lot of new construction. There's insufficient financing mechanisms. Banks are very hesitant to lend, and in some cases, you might not have the capacity to bring on new debt. In addition, the federal government is moving in the right direction, but as many of you know, there are a lot of goals, there are not a lot of concrete regulations, and more importantly, there are not a lot of incentivizing programs to push you in that direction. Most importantly, your costs are rising. They're going to keep rising. The most important thing is that your building staff have to be adequately trained, and that's the starting point to implementing any energy savings program, whether you're doing something in-house or you're doing a top-down comprehensive retrofit. Here are the applicable regulations. I'm not sure how many of you sat in the session yesterday where they went through the energy audits. Every 5 years, if you're a public housing authority, you have to do them. An important distinction is the regulations are being revised. Where there was some ambiguity in the regs before, now they clearly delineate that you do not have to go outside to do an energy audit. If your staff has a national accreditation, you can do this in-house. And that's an important distinction. Instead of spending $5,000 or $10,000 every 5 years to get a nice package that you're going to look at, and then the day after your energy audit, it's going to sit on the shelf, and then again in 5 years, you're going to spend that money. And it's not just the money that you're spending on the energy audit, it's also the time of your staff to do an RFP, to evaluate the responses, to select the right vendor. For a fraction of that, you can train your staff, your building superintendent, your senior facilities people, your property managers, those who have a baseline knowledge of building systems. You can train them to the national accreditation for a fraction of the cost. They can do your energy audits. It's not a conflict of interest because their national accreditation is what's on the line. You have that person on site every day of every week, of every month, of every year during those 5 years to be your driver of energy efficiency. And you're enhancing your staff's skills. It's about job creation. Physical needs assessment. You heard that the regulations are changing. They're looking at energy issues. That's another area where you have to write to those issues. If your staff is trained, you have the ability to do that. You don't need to bring in somebody else. 4350.1, the energy conservation section, chapter 12. There are some cases, depending on the type of program that you have, in some cases when you're submitting a rent increase, a budget-based rent increase, you have to do a comprehensive technical energy audit. All HUD says is that it has to be performed by a licensed professional engineer, very, very expensive, or a certified energy auditor. In a few minutes we'll be talking about certification programs out there, but you have the ability to bring that certification in-house. Your management and occupancy reviews. There were some pilot programs run when I was at HUD about how the section on energy conservation was to be addressed. Right now it's just a few questions where they ask you what you're doing. But it's 10% of your overall score, and it is additionally in the general category, it's another 10%. So you have the ability to hit your scores on there if you have trained staff. If you're going to a mark-to-market restructuring, OAP will actually lend to green restructuring. Those are things that you can do. I'll come back to that in a second. When you go through a MAP lending process, if you're doing a new construction, refinance, or substantial rehab, they will actually ask you what your energy conservation measures are. If you don't have an answer, you'll be sent back for a new concept meeting. In your approved management fees, it is something that you can point out to HUD that you have the certified staff when you're justifying your management fees. And HUD asks you to educate your tenants. Working with your staff, getting everybody trained, works with tenant education. HUD has its own set of requirements. So one of the things that we're seeing in the industry is the industry is starting to put in place their own regulations, which in many cases are more restrictive than HUD's requirements. Seattle just expanded it. Non-residential buildings have to be benchmarked annually, and the city of Seattle collects the data. Multifamily buildings, they just added that in effective April 1st of this year. Multifamily buildings not only have to report their data to the city of Seattle, but they additionally have to report it to tenants upon request. City of New York, local law 87, effective in 2013. Energy audit on all buildings, including multifamily, over 50,000 square feet. The only thing New York City says is the energy auditor has to have a recognized national certification, and those are the systems that the energy audit has to cover. Just to give you an idea from the HUD perspective, The HUD energy strategy, we've been told is about to be released to Congress. They're supposed to report to Congress every 2 years. It doesn't quite work out that way. But in the last energy strategy that was released to Congress, they had 4 out of the 25 strategy points were keyed towards training. Provide your residents with training, monitor it in public housing, support training for your managers and maintenance staff, and work with outside groups and HUD partners to bring training in-house. In HUD's current strategic plan, which runs from 2010 to 2015, there are 5 goals. Goal 4 out of 5 is actually broken down into 2 points that emphasize energy efficiency, job creation, and promoting training in your buildings. You know, as you're here, you know this is a focus of HUD. HUD has for a long time talked about training your buildings and staff. One of the things that has been a challenge in the industry is what that training means. For a long time, there were a number of, and they still do exist, there were a number of organizations, community colleges, local partners that will offer you a green course, and you can send your staff to it. And by no means is there not any value in those. There is value in those programs. But one of the things that's changed is the industry has come together and they've put together some national certifications. And that's the key point that we want you to take away from here, is how there are national groups that have the ability to provide you that third-party certification. The Association of Energy Engineers is one, BPI, ResNet, USGBC, which is LEED, ISHPA, NABCET, IREC. These are all national accrediting bodies that provide these certifications so that your staff, when they go out for training, they're not just getting a stamp of approval from whoever the training provider is. They're being tested and certified by a third-party entity. Now, one of the good things here today, some of you may have sat through the BPI and ResNet presentation yesterday. We won't belabor those points that were covered yesterday, but we are going to have some experts in these fields talk to you about what your staff would expect if they were to go into the training and what the benefits are. Huerta Niels, I'm going to turn it over to him. As Jared mentioned at the beginning, he is our lead trainer for our company. He's our director of architecture. He has trained more lead people in the Northeast than anybody else, trained in a number of cities, and he'll go through, he's also an approved instructor for the Association of Energy Engineers. So I'm going to turn it over to him, then I'll come back, but he's going to give you some ideas on how this is really valuable to your people.
Morning. Glad you got a chance to come out today. And my name is Huerta Niels. Like I said before, I'm a licensed architect here in the state of New York and New Jersey. And I've trained a bunch of people on LEED on various formats, from operations and maintenance to building design and construction. I understand and worked on tons of different kinds of LEED buildings. I've worked on about 6, not tons, but I've also sat on many boards trying to help people turn the corner on saving energy. Now, LEED isn't the end of the world, and it isn't the beginning at the same time. I think people get turned off by LEED because of the cost that may be associated with it up front. But the reality is you'll end up with a building that's going to save energy, and it's also going to save the environment, and it's also going to save land. Now, Clean Edison, we teach all the various components of it. Of course, LEED GA is the first step here. So that's Green Associate. So if you want to send your staff to get educated on LEED, Green Associate is going to be your first step, and it helps you turn the corner and understanding all the components that are involved in the green industry. So it may not necessarily be all the components involved in the specific building. Now, to go past Green Associate, you're looking at ideally becoming a LEED AP. That's where I am. I've been a LEED AP since 2005, and I've worked on everything including the World Trade Center, the new World Trade Center. But under that portfolio, you've got building design and construction, which ideally points to new construction buildings and big renovations. And these are ideally going to say, I'm going to be able to save about 30% energy if I follow these methods, but it's mostly a prescriptive pattern. I'm going to pass this off to my engineer. I'm not going to actually have hands-on information. I'm going to say, I'm going to try to meet these points and this criteria in my dialogue. So, under energy and atmosphere, which is one of the components of building design and construction, one of the components of LEED, I'll target a percentage savings. So I think that the AARA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, says we are looking at a 20% energy savings. So ideally, that's like a silver building. And what does that mean? Most likely targeting your mechanical systems and understanding how those mechanical systems work. And depending on how much money you're going to spend is going to determine how much money you're going to save on the energy efficiency component of it. So understanding LEED as a whole is a very good thing for building operation and building managers to get hold of. Now, of course, you can hire a LEED consultant to come on and help you out, but that may cost you more money, so understanding from the inside is really where you want to be. Now, of course, we believe at Clean Edison that existing buildings operations and maintenance is going to be the one component of LEED that continues to work every year after year. Now, there's new legislation out there for the International Green Building Codes that we'll be looking at probably in the next year, and that may displace LEED a bit. So because the International Green Building Code is going to be free, LEED is going to be an opportunity that we believe the operations and maintenance component is one of the things that was one of the most well-written components of LEED, and we expect that to live on. Now, operations and maintenance is really on the facility side. So it helps you turn the corner in your building, understand every piece of it, and determine where can I actually achieve these points. Now, there's also an energy component. There's a site component in terms of what type of site am I on. And is it an existing facility? Is it an existing HUD building? Is it an existing office building? In terms of, so you have site components for landscape. You have site components for pesticides. You have water efficiency requirements. They're looking at a 20% baseline number. So that means what is your building versus the EPA standard of 1992? How much water are you using in this building? And how much water do you want to save? And how much does that water return into actual cost? And how can you get that achieved? There's a transportation component. How many cars of this type is your facility using? Who's the furthest commuter, depending on what type of building you're running and operating. Then, of course, there's other smaller components. You have interior design and construction. Obviously, interiors are so varied that what we're putting in them, you can't actually put in one book, so they put it in a separate book and help you understand what those specific items are. And then finally, of course, homes. The homes division for LEED isn't as successful as BPI or ResNet, but it does exist under LEED, and there aren't a whole lot of LEED homes out there, but it's definitely worth taking a look into. Now, Clean Edison also offers an opportunity for what most people can't get, and that's project experience. Once you become a LEED GA, it's very easy to get that actual accreditation. The next step is becoming a LEED AP, and it requires you to have at least 2 years experience working in a LEED project. Well, we all know that the industry is kind of stalled right now, so there's very few LEED projects you can actually work on. We have them in our office that we work on, and we permit people to use our project experience and contribute to a LEED project, and then go on and take their LEED AP component, which has been very successful up until now. We want that to continue, actually. Now, okay.
It's a fast space bar. Let's see here. There you go.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So, in conjunction with the Association of Energy Engineers, they created BEST, Building Energy Sustainable Technician. And what does this course really do? This course drills down on the building operators' everyday components. What are they looking at in their building? In the specific building type, multifamily buildings, garden apartments, however they may be set up, a building technician can now individually look at each piece of the building and determine, is it working efficiently or not? And this course, 4-day course, permits any building technician, a guy with a black seal, a guy with a blue seal, an electrical engineer who works specifically in changing light bulbs, or even a mechanical guy who's not really all the way up to speed. So it takes various parts of your building energy and engineers and puts them all in one room and lets them learn about different systems in the building, and now they can all come out with a certification that's called BEST, and it permits them to actually review specific components of the building and say, okay, we can save energy here. I can save energy here, and they're interacting with this stuff every day. And that's really where the rubber meets the road for a building owner and building operator. And to be able to provide this class to this national audience is a very important component. So ideally, they're going to look at your property manager and your senior staff, and they're going to say, we're going to cover your building utilities. We're going to look at your actual utility bill. And from that utility bill, you can begin to make a plan on how to satisfy your energy components of this building. Are you above benchmark? Is your building being run efficiently? Well, most buildings, as we heard Ben speak about earlier, they're not, because they're built before these codes even came out. So to be able to meet these codes, I now have to look at what I'm doing. How many square foot do I have? What's my electric? What's my fuel cost? We'll look at that actual bill and tell you where you're making mistakes on this electrical bill, on your energy bill. Are you running too many pieces of mechanical equipment at the peak hour? Can this piece of equipment be run in the middle of the night? Well, that's just the timer. Let's do that. Immediately you'll start to see the electrical bill decline. Just from Best alone, Starwood Hotels, I think they saved $4.5 billion or $1 million, or I forgot the actual number, but it's pretty high. I can get it right now. And they ran a BEST program and were able to reduce their energy costs by 20% across the board. Now, let me see the actual numbers here.
3.4 million. Starwood Hotels, which this is part of that group, they brought in, at each one of their hotels, they brought in their senior facilities people. They put them through the BEST certification program, sent those people back on site to run the hotels, and within 1 year they had reduced their energy costs. Adjusted for inflation and weather and all that, they had decreased their energy costs by $3.4 million.
Pretty robust. So ideally, we're looking at financial considerations. We'll actually look at a return on investment. So instead of having to call an auditor in, your staff can do all this return on investment numbers. They can say, okay, this is the capital piece of equipment. This is what we need to replace. Can we get an ROI in 10 years, 5 years, 20 years? You can immediately do that number in that calculation. They show you in the class. I think it's very worth doing. Of course, it's going to talk about looking at different instrumentation. So I can look at my different plans, what kind of billing I have, and say, all right, let's step back from this piece of equipment and determine if it's running efficiently or not. Permits you to actually log energy. So if I have specific tenant uses and tenant habits, you can look at that habit and determine how to address it. If someone leaves the light on all the time, well, maybe I can't tell them to turn the light off, but maybe I can put a vacancy sensor in. So now that light goes off only when they leave the room after 30 minutes. Different ways in which I can log energy. So I can identify different energy uses in the building and meter and monitor that energy for a short period of time, and then come back with a solution on how much energy that component is actually using. It teaches hands-on use of the various tools for the mechanical and the electrical engineers that you have in your facilities. So now they're familiar with the new tools that's available in the class, which is really an important element. We'll look at lighting, looking at lighting retrofits, how to get it done efficiently, and fluorescent bulb use and the lumen depreciation over the years. You can see the chart. You can actually see when you're making mistakes and when you're not. So it permits you as a building operator to make a comprehensive plan, pretty much from top to bottom, to begin to pre-audit the building. You don't have to call a certified energy manager in. You'll have this staff available to you every day. And if they follow the plan from top to bottom, just like Starwoods did, next thing you know, you're saving a lot of money. And it costs you such a little bit amount of money to actually do it. That's really the key here. So I can now train someone that's here all day, and he'll come up to speed with it. And there's some BEST trained technicians that operate 2 and 3 buildings. And one BEST guy goes from one building to the next, and he trains that staff in that building on the best practices, puts the implementation in place, and then from top to bottom they see their energy bills change, because the guys that operate the building every day are the ones that have learned this system, and that's really the key here. It goes through almost all the major components. I mean, there's nothing that's not covered. We talk about power, specifically electrical energy. We talk about HVAC systems, mechanical systems, from the supply side, from cooling towers, air handling units. It gives you a really interesting breakdown on the mechanical systems in the building and where you're making mistakes. If this water's coming back from the chiller at the same temperature it went out, Obviously, there's either a weather pattern that we're encouraging here, or I'm sending the water at too cold of a temperature. So I need to really balance that back out. It really is hands-on. It talks about components that most mechanical guys may or may not be familiar with. It really gives you an opportunity to say, I can focus on these specific problems. I can literally take a reading of a mechanical system and tell you right away, either you're in tune, you're out of tune, or you're right on. And that is what this course provides you. And I think that's a really important element of understanding the building energy. Talks about building automation systems, if you have one or if you don't. Now, those are expensive systems, and most people don't have the opportunity to put one of these in, but it does look at the benchmarks on that. Looks at energy savings in offices, of course, and maintenance opportunities. So obviously, it's all about maintenance, and with having a comprehensive plan, it's really going to help the building manager determine how much energy he's going to save in a year. And that's really what you want to look at. You're going to look at this overall. Okay, so next year, we expect fuel costs to go up this much. What can we do now to begin to bring this cost down? And ideally, BEST is the ideal, I think it's the ideal class 4 building owners and building operators. There really isn't one like it across the U.S. The Association of Energy Engineers created this class in conjunction with Ashmore, in conjunction with AIA, USGBC, United States Green Building Council, and of course, the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America. All of them came together to produce a class that doesn't quite have the same number crunch as a certified energy manager, because they're not trying to go over the heads of the individuals that are working in these buildings every day. I'm not saying that they couldn't do these numbers, but it may take a month to crunch some of them. So they're trying to give you right away, within the first day or two of getting your BEST certification, as soon as you come out of the class, you can literally go to your facility, open up the book, and begin to start implementing a lot of these energy problems that you see. And it can be any number of them. And I think that the class is a fantastic one. And I'm actually a BEST certified technician myself. So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me. I'll be here, and we'll go on from there. Ben?
Thanks, Gordon. You know, just to follow up on 2 points that he raised. I know one of you in the audience is a certified energy manager. We don't really go into detail because that is such a comprehensive designation and requires 10 years experience. It's for someone who is an architect or engineer. But many of the components are tied into BEST. A second thing that I wanted to just briefly follow up on. We know LEED is expensive, and we hear the complaints in the industry that if you're not in new construction, and even if you are in new construction, why are you going to pay the money to get a LEED accreditation? In some cases, it is a decision that properties make. But what LEED has recognized is that even if your building is not new and you don't have the ability to put that plaque on your front entry that says you're LEED Silver, LEED Gold, LEED Platinum, you do have the ability to certify your operations and maintenance. And that is something that can be very valuable in your communities, and valuable to HUD, where you have the ability to say, listen, we're an old building, we weren't built to LEED standards, but the people who are there running the building every single day are certified that they are running that building to LEED's operating and maintenance systems. I'm not going to belabor the point because Scott from South Place will be talking about BPI, and some of you may have heard their session yesterday. I did want to expand to let you know that there's more than the BPI multifamily building analyst. These are the courses that your staff can take depending on what your needs are. Now, we recognize that on your site, building envelope and shell professional really might not be applicable. That might be more applicable to somebody who's actually a contractor who is on site. But these are some of the things that if you train your staff to BPI standards, to basic building analyst, or your staff become multifamily building analysts, when you're going out to do RFPs, you know what BPI means, you know what's inherent in those systems, and you have the ability to put in your RFP that if you're doing envelope and shell work, that your contractor has to be certified in BPI envelope and shell. ResNet is a home energy rating system. These are the systems. Scott will go into a little bit more detail. ResNet spoke yesterday. ResNet and BPI are very similar. Think of ResNet as the numerical score. Think of BPI as the holistic assessment And also BPI is existing homes, resident, really has not gotten into that space. It's new construction. I'm going to real briefly touch on, our website details are here if you want more details. I know that these are really the going far out there into the energy conservation. But if you're looking at solar, there are developments that are doing solar. There's training for your staff on solar PV, solar thermal, if you're heating your hot water based off of solar panels. If you're doing geothermal training, if you're going to put a heating system into the ground for energy savings. Again, these are expensive, but they're great systems. Here's why the training is important. There was an op-ed a month and a half ago in the LA Times where some electricians had put solar panels on the building, on a multifamily building. And while those electricians had the ability to understand electrical systems, they were not experts in solar. And unfortunately, 2 of them were electrocuted. There was a high enough load on the systems that they were electrocuted. And the LA Times actually wrote an op-ed that in Los Angeles, you have to be certified to do nails, you have to be certified to be a masseuse, you have to be certified to be a taxi driver. There were all of these low-risk fields that required a licensing and certification and accreditation, but solar installers don't. So if you're looking to do comprehensive solar work, it is incredibly important that you have your staff trained and that you require that the person putting solar in does the training, because solar is incredibly complicated. You see the big solar panels? A lot of people don't realize it works like Christmas tree lights. If you have a shadow on any part of that solar panel, it goes down completely. Your solar panels have to be angled to the right way, depending on where you are in the country and where the sun is. If your solar panels aren't angled the right way, they're not going to work. So that's why it's important. If you're looking at doing those high-level efficiency measures, you need to make sure that you're not wasting your money and that you require someone who is certified and accredited by the national solar bodies. Wind, that's more applicable in the Southwest, but again, that's an important training. And the last one I want to talk about, because it could be very applicable to you, is deconstruction. For those of you that are public housing authorities, you have to comply with Section 3 requirements. What deconstruction is it's instead of taking a wrecking ball to your facility, it is taking it down slowly, recycling your products. It is more costly up front and far more labor intensive. But in the end, when you factor in the money you gain from recycling, from selling your scrap metal, from reusing your materials, those savings exceed the additional labor costs. And within your buildings, deconstruction training is a great training program for some of your tenants, at-risk youths. Those are programs that can go through that type of training. So if you're looking to do a comprehensive takedown and rebuild, you can save money, you can create jobs, and you can satisfy your Section 3 requirements. The same thing with lead. I'm sure many of you know if you have any lead-based paint in your buildings, anytime there's a project somebody has to be certified, you can bring that training in-house so you don't have to scope it out. Your people can comply with EPA regulations and they can do the lead work themselves so long as they have a current and valid certificate. I mentioned that I'd come back to it. We've talked about cost savings, and that is a very important thing. But there's also your tenants. And one of the things that we know and that the industry has confirmed over and over again is that when you do comprehensive energy work, whether it is simply having your super trained as a best certified person who comes in and develops your own energy plan, where you're hitting the low-hanging fruit because today you don't have the capital availability to do comprehensive retrofit, those benefits translate to your tenants. It's only one half the equation, costs. The other half is your tenants' daily lives. And as we all know in HUD, our core mission is to promote healthy, safe, decent, and affordable housing. Well, healthy, safe, decent, those are all things that hit on energy conservation. And there are a number of training programs that are out there. Now these, I will qualify by saying, they are not national accreditations. These are given by training providers that come in that have the expertise to work with your tenants to do that behavior modification, to educate them about what's going on in your building, how that benefits them, how they can contribute to them. Because if you get their buy-in to what you're doing and they can see how it makes their life better, how your costs are going down so you have more money for their services, they'll buy into it. You know, I mentioned I'd save this to the end because I know this is probably what matters to you, how you fund it. And it's not as difficult as you think. To begin with, training is a fraction of the cost of sending that expertise outside of your property and bringing it in. But there's ways that you can do it. It's an allowable project expense. It is something you can pull out of your replacement reserve accounts, per the HUD regs. If you want to go outside of your individual operating budget, Enterprise Communities, they're here, they're a co-sponsor. They have a sustainability training grant program. If you put up 2/3 of the money, and it can come from you, it doesn't have to come from an outside partner. If you put up 2/3 of the money, they'll give you up to $3,000 for the rest of it. Grant partners are important. HUD, if you're going through an OAP mark-to-market restructuring, HUD will actually underwrite into the retrofit $5,000 for training in the first year and $1,000 every other year thereafter for continuing education. And if your key staff leaves, the person who received that $5,000 training, they'll give you the $5,000 again. There are a few companies, Clean Edison is the only one that fully satisfies all of the core courses and the elective courses, but there are a few companies out there that actually have been approved by HUD to teach either their core courses or their elective courses that OAP training money can be spent on. Lender programs. Lenders are starting to recognize that training is a critical part of doing a comprehensive energy retrofit. I'm from New York City. In New York City, they just started the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation that was seeded by with $37 million to do energy work throughout the 5 boroughs, and they've raised another $100 million through philanthropy. Their core mission is to lend to projects to do retrofitting. But based on the studies and what has come out there, they have realized that within that lending, they are actually putting requirements for the training of staff, so that both before the process is made easier and after the process is run as intended. So a number of your lenders, if you're going to go out there for them, they'll not only lend your project, but they'll also pay to train your staff. ESCOs as well. A qualified energy conservation bonds. It's very coincidental, but on Monday in the New York Times, they ran an article about qualified energy conservation bonds. They are a program where you can use bond financing to do energy work. I have the link to the article here. It has no expiration date, which is incredibly unusual in federal programs. Many of them are sunsetted even if the money is not allocated. This program has no expiration date, and nobody is using that. So as you go back to your communities, as you speak with your lenders, it is an opportunity that perhaps you could bring bond monies in through this program to do energy retrofitting. And the last thing are our federal, state, and local grant partners. I'm going to have Megan come up and talk to you for a few minutes about some of the ways and some of the successes that we've had at Clean Edison in working with grant programs around the country, and then I'll be back after that. Thank
you. Good morning, everybody. I know Ben and I have been kind of talking to a few of you occasionally at our table out there, but one of the things that I do at Clean Edison specifically is try to open up funding sources for a lot of our particular clients. Specifically, what I do is form public and private partnerships between employers, community colleges, workforce investment boards, and organizations like yourselves, actually, to find grant programs, to find funding that is available to them, to find funding that's available to suit their particular needs, and hopefully open up that funding so that they can access our training programs and get the certifications that they need to do the work that they need to do. One of the ways that we need to do that, however, is make sure that we are offering nationally recognized certifications in order to be sure that they are getting the right education that that's going to be portable across different states, that they can use on different projects, and we can make sure that they're getting the state-of-the-art training in the fields that they're looking to do. I know Ben was talking about some of the dangers of solar panel installation. Obviously, we don't want anybody getting electrocuted. It'll kind of, stop this whole industry before we get started. And the same goes for energy efficiency. You're looking at very complex systems. You're looking at gas systems. You're looking at CAS testing, and all of that needs to be done by somebody that understands what those systems are, understands how to operate them, and understands how to test them safely. And so basically what I do is make sure that people can have a green job, and they know how to have a green job, and they know how to do it safely and effectively. And all of you have a green job. All of you are focused on reducing the amount of energy that you consume and reducing the amount of energy, more importantly, that you waste. And all of you either need to know how to do that effectively, or you need to know how to bring in the people that have the proper certifications to do that correctly. And what we do at Clean Edison is help you pay for that training. So depending on where you are and who you can partner with and what you're doing, we can typically find a grant program that will fit your needs. We'll find employers in the area who need that training as well and can be part of that similar program. We involve the workforce investment boards, we involve the community colleges, and it's something that we do all around the country, whether it's training dislocated workers, incumbent workers, people that are already employed, so that we can kind of further this industry in the way that makes the most sense. But I want to let Scott get up here as soon as possible, because I know we don't have too much time, so forgive me. Thank you.
Yeah, just in closing, you're here, you took the time out of your day to come here to talk about energy. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but when you go back and you're talking to your management teams, and you're talking to your community representatives, here's how you need to sell this. You all live in homes, and if you take a home and you let it fall into disrepair, the value of your home goes down. But with a little bit of elbow grease, a little bit of investment, you can fix the repairs that need to be done in your home, and the value of your home goes back up. So we can let our homes slide for a number of years. With a little bit of money, a little bit of effort, we can bring their value back up, and at the end of the day, if we wanted to sell a home, we haven't lost the money. Energy efficiency does not work that way. What you are losing today, you're flushing down the toilet. If your building could save $10,000, $20,000, or in the case of Starwood Hotels, $3.4 million a year, if you could save that money by doing an energy plan and energy retrofit, until you do that, you are losing that money and you will never see that money again. It's not like doing a home remodeling. You can't do the retrofit and go back and save that money that you've lost. When it comes to energy efficiency, when it comes to the plans that you're doing, you have to do it today, because you're never going to get that money, and that money is just flowing out your windows, it's flowing out your ducts, and it's money that you could be using to preserve and enhance your affordable housing. I'm going to pop in Scott's slide deck for him to go over some things and show you some pictures. But at the end, we'll all be available for questions. And as we mentioned, there is a booth outside where we can go in more depth. We'll be here for the rest of the afternoon.